Since the end of World War II, South Carolina has gone through a change so huge, it's almost hard to wrap your head around. It's transformed from a state pretty much defined by farming into this modern powerhouse of manufacturing, global trade, and tourism. So today, we're going to dig into exactly how the Palmetto State completely reinvented itself. Honestly, these two pictures right here tell you almost everything you need to know. On the left, that's the old South Carolina, rural, agricultural. And on the right, that's the new South Carolina, high-tech, connected to the entire world. So how in the world did the state get from point A to point B? Well, let's break it down. All right, let's start with the most fundamental change of all, the move away from an economy that had been pretty much the same for centuries. And we're not talking about a small adjustment here. This was a complete and total economic reinvention. For most of the state's history, one thing was true: cotton was king. But after World War II, that started to change, and fast. Cotton farming just plummeted. It shrank from over 1 million acres of production all the way down to just about 100,000 by 2010. The old farm-based way of life was making way for something entirely new. Now, this doesn't mean farming just disappeared. Not at all. It evolved. It became what we now call agribusiness. Think of it as the modern, high-tech, super efficient version of farming. And it's a massive, fast-growing industry that's now worth around $5 billion a year in South Carolina. So if the old agricultural economy was fading out, what rushed in to fill the void? Well, the new engines of growth were all about advanced manufacturing and forging deep connections with international trade. And just look at this lineup. Seriously, these aren't your small local companies. We're talking about global giants. BMW, Boeing, Samsung. These massive international corporations saw a huge opportunity in South Carolina, and they moved in, building these enormous manufacturing plants that completely changed the job market. Let's just take one example, that BMW plant in Spartanburg. This single factory is one of the company's most productive plants in the entire world. It ships more than $40 billion worth of cars to over 190 different markets. That is an incredible, mind-boggling level of global reach coming from just one spot. In this chart, it really puts the new economic reality into perfect perspective. Just look at the sheer scale of manufacturing's impact. Yeah, agribusiness and tourism are big deals for sure, but manufacturing is just in a whole other league. It is the engine driving the state's modern economy, hands down. So the really crucial point to get here is that this whole transformation was fueled by globalization. The state had accessible ports, it was building up its infrastructure, and it had business-friendly policies. All of that made it an incredibly attractive place for foreign companies to invest, which in turn created thousands upon thousands of skilled jobs. And you can see that global connection right here on this list. The products being made in South Carolina. We're talking cars, planes, tires. They're being shipped all over the planet. When your top export destinations are places like China and Germany, you know you're deeply plugged into the global marketplace. But wait, manufacturing isn't the whole story. Not by a long shot. There's another massive pillar holding up the modern South Carolina economy. And that's the service industry, which is powered by two main things: tourism and a very significant military presence. Let's start with a number. I want you to just think about this number for a second. $29 billion. That's how much money tourism alone brought into the state in 1 year back in 2019. It's a staggering figure that just shows you how vital visitors are to the state's bottom line. And what's driving all that cash? You guessed it, sun and sand. The engine for that tourism boom is the state's gorgeous coastline. Developers came in and transformed these once quiet beach towns like Myrtle Beach and Hilton Head into major destinations with hotels, golf courses, and resorts, attracting millions and millions of people every single year. And the impact on jobs is just huge. Think about this. 1 out of every 10 jobs in the entire state is tied to tourism. And then, alongside all that, you have major military installations like Fort Jackson and Parris Island that provide a really steady economic foundation for communities all across the state. Okay, so far, this all sounds pretty amazing, right? We've got this incredible story of economic growth, job creation, and modernization. But progress is never simple, and it almost always comes with a price tag. This rapid development created a whole new set of really tough challenges and dilemmas for the state. And this right here is the central conflict, the two sides of the same coin. On one side, you have all the clear benefits: a booming economy, new jobs, modern infrastructure. But on the other side, you've got the costs: industrial pollution, overbuilding, a serious strain on natural resources, and even a threat to the state's unique cultural heritage. And this threat is very, very real, especially for communities like the Gullah Geechee. These are descendants of enslaved Africans who have kept this incredible, unique culture alive along the coast for centuries. This quote just highlights their struggle. The exact same development that fuels that tourism boom threatens to completely erase their communities because their historic land is now seen as undeveloped prime real estate. So how do you power all of this new industry and growth? I mean, it takes a tremendous amount of energy. Well, in South Carolina, the answer has been pretty clear: nuclear. More than half, 55% of the state's electricity comes from its 4 nuclear power plants. But that solution leads to its own massive, complicated question. Sure, nuclear power is efficient, but it creates this highly radioactive waste that is dangerous for literally thousands of years. So the question of how and where to safely store this stuff is a huge environmental problem with no easy answer in sight. All right, so let's pull all these threads together. Where does this all leave us? We've seen a state that has basically raced into the future, building this powerful, modern economy. But now, it's really grappling with the consequences of all that rapid growth. When you really look at it, the story of modern South Carolina boils down to this one thing: a constant, delicate balancing act. It's this ongoing tension between building new factories and protecting the environment, between developing the coastline for tourists and preserving the unique cultures that have called that coast home for centuries. And that really leaves us with this final, fundamental question. And it's a challenge that's not just for South Carolina, but for growing places all over the world. How do you embrace progress and build a prosperous future without paving over the very history, culture, and environment that make a place worth calling home in the first place?